Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. It's Dr. Phil recording on a new PowerPoint format. Yay! But I'm also doing war, so boo. Previously, I've been doing a couple of these things where I think my expertise comes through, or sometimes it's where basically my interest comes through. As far as aircraft are concerned, of course, I am not particularly an expert. I'm just an enthusiast. Got to make that distinction because my theories are just as good as anybody else's. But I'm now using a new format. I'm using the PowerPoint format with the recording feature, and hopefully that will make life a little bit easier. Previously, what I did was I would just point a camera at a computer screen, basically, and although that got the point across, it was a little bit unclear. So you've got a nice sharp image now, and I've also got a pointer. I can draw lines. See that? Wow, I can do a smiley face. Hello, I'm a smiley face. So that's a bit happy. The presentation isn't as happy because it's talking about war. But what I thought I'd do is I'd just discuss a few aspects which were pertinent at the time. And it covers the topic of A, data analysis, and B, misinformation that's going on at the moment, which are both very interesting because sometimes if you're disinterested in a particular topic, you can get swept away with the disinformation. And also, the data has sent me in a very intriguing direction. So I thought I'd present this to you. I've already presented it in a live stream a few months ago now, but that one is a live stream with 2 hours of opal cutting and other things on the end of it, so it's not a dedicated video. So I thought I'd just create a dedicated PowerPoint for you. And it's to do with this Ilyushin 76 that fell a few months ago now. It fell over Belgorod, and there was an awful lot of rumor and misinformation and information, whatever, that was going on about what exactly was happening with that plane. Did it have weapons? Did it have prisoners? Was it shot down by Ukraine? Was it shot down by Russia? There was a whole heap of stuff. So I thought I'd talk about that. I'm going to use pretty much the previous presentation that I did on the live stream, but I've added a few other things. So I've altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further. We have a repeat of what's been happening quite a few times, but at this point it only happened 2 or 3 times. What again? Yeah, Wednesday the 24th of the 1st, a Russian aircraft was seen to fall from the sky. Now, this is at a period of time when an awful lot of Russian aircraft were falling from the sky. If you remember correctly, there was a mainstay, or what we call in the West an AWACS, which is basically a giant flying radar dish that happened to have an unfortunate accident with a Ukrainian missile. No, these things happen. So another thing happened, and this time it was an Ilyushin 76, which is a very similar aircraft, except it doesn't have that giant dish on it. This time around, it was carrying stuff. So it was a transport plane. It had a relatively interesting journey. Instead of going straight from Syria, and why it was in Syria, I have no idea. Instead of going straight from Syria up to Crimea and then to Belgorod, which is just up here, bing, 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 bing. Instead, it decided I'll use a different color, which is purple. Yay! It decided to go basically from Syria around Egypt and up here through what basically is most of Iran or Iraq, that kind of area, and then into Russia proper, and then through the Stans, and then it chucks a left a bit, and then it turns off its transponder, and so we don't see any more of it on the radar, but that's only because it's turned off its transponder. It's still around. It's still got 4 hours to live, I do believe. It turned off its transponder at 7, and it was seen to fall at 10. So sorry, it was 3 hours to live. And all of that checks out. So we know that it turned off its transponder at 7. We know it finally fell at 10 o'clock. So all of that is relatively easy to identify. There is a little bit of controversy surrounding where the plane started. Don't think the Russians mentioned that they were starting in Syria. So that could be in doubt, but I don't think it is. I think we're pretty okay with this particular story. But the Syrian connection is an interesting one to start with anyway. But that's the basic story, and now we're going to have to go into what everyone's been saying about it. So once again, we have 2 competing stories. And you know, Russia, they're so determined to deny Ukrainian involvement. No, so last week. You see, apparently they're perfectly okay with Ukraine being involved now because they've got great little stories saying there were 65 prisoners on board and Ukraine has shot their own people down. Ukraine, for their part, originally released a story and then didn't release the story or retracted it. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. How many theories are there as to why they did that? Who knows? Maybe they got their information and then they got some updated information. They're going, whoops, that wasn't true, so they redacted it, or maybe they were trying to be sensitive. Who knows? The basic story is that we have absolutely no idea, based on anyone's testimony, what happened. And Ukraine has suggested there were S-300 missiles on board the plane. The plane's actually come out of Syria, so maybe there were some drones on there, some Shahed drones. Maybe there were a load of Ukrainians on there. Who knows? But it seems a little bit strange that there are Ukrainians going for a little pleasure cruise to somewhere else. It's a bit weird. But at any rate, I'm sure there's a perfectly good explanation by both. No, there isn't. We're probably going to have to do something about this. We're probably going to have to science it. The obvious question is, how do we turn basic information into something which we can quantify? Basically, let's science this. So what we've got here is an image, which is a still from a video that was taken. And here's this is the still, and here's another still from the video that was taken. You'll notice that there are a couple of green dots there. There's a reason for those dots. The first green dot on the left-hand side here, that represents the plane that was falling. And on the right-hand side, the green dots are going across the moment when the plane catastrophically disassembled itself. What we can do with this is, because these two images are taken from the same video, they're roughly the same distance apart. Now, obviously the plane might have come forwards or backwards. We can't deal with that, but it gives us a pretty good reference point, and we know the dimensions of the plane, so we know roughly how big that little green dot is in the image. So we can extrapolate. We can see how many green dots the catastrophic disassembly has actually occupied, and from that we can generally assess the size of the plume. Now, I am the first to say that this is a relatively rough method. The best idea is to do a pixel count, of course, but ain't nobody got time for that. I'm into something called a Fermi estimate. You can look that up in your own time, but basically it's not a case of near enough is good enough. It's a case of you do as much research as is necessary. So we plug in the numbers, and basically the idea is that this plume is about 10,000 kilograms of trinitrotoluene. Now, I'm not going to say the word because YouTube. But trinitrotoluene is actually the word in which the acronym is made from, if you know what I mean. And so I'll be using that term rather than anything else. Or I might use some more fun acronyms, but I'm certainly going to try and keep this presentation above the board. The next thing to do, of course, is to have a crack at what the plane was carrying. So what was it carrying? Well, we've got a few theories, and depending on which agency you're getting your theory from, you're going to get a different idea of what the plane was carrying. But we've got three basic ideas. One is Ukrainians, 65 Ukrainians. The other one is Shahed drones. It was coming from Syria after all. And the other one is S-200, how do I put this? Tubes. S-200 tubes. What can we do with this? Well, we have a general idea of the loadout of each of these. We obviously know what the loadout of a Ukrainian is. We also know what the loadout of a Shahed drone is, the approximate amount of trinitrotoluene that it carries, and we also have the dimensions of the pointy tubes, the S-200s, and we have an idea of the size of the Special Military Operation Cranium. That's a good one. We have an idea of that size, and we also know how much trinitrotoluene it has within it. But of course there is fuel, and we'll get into that in a minute. So that's the general idea of the manifest of this plane. Can we do anything with that? Since we have a few theories on what the plane was actually carrying, we can then start having a crack at how many of these objects the plane could possibly carry and compare that to the unscheduled disassembly that occurred. So how can we do that? Basically, I went through a couple of very reputable websites which were dealing with ordnance and stuff, and I do have the links, and I'll possibly put them in the description as well, but you can see the links that are actually sitting there happily on the screen. So all of the calculations are above the board. I just threw them into Excel. I can give you the Excel spreadsheets if you ask for them as well. So it's not a big deal. And if you have any extra information or extra accurate information, I'm fine with that. This information that I've managed to get should be sufficient for our investigation, but you can be as accurate as you like with this. I don't mind. What have we found out from this? Well, we can do some scenarios. If the plane was carrying X, the scheduled disassembly would say it was carrying this many of X. That's how it works. So what have we found out? If the thing was carrying S-300 missiles, the size of the unscheduled disassembly would mean that it was approximately 10 to 12 of those. And just pointing this out, it was a bit harder to do these S-300s because they not only contained the Special Military Operation Cranium, they also had fuel on board. So basically what I did was I just did the whole weight of the object and then assumed that was trinitrotoluene to get that kind of calculation. It's rough and ready, I get that, but it's probably accurate enough. Doing the same thing with the Shahed drones, because the Shahed drones are electrical, they operate on batteries, and I don't think they were made by Samsung, so they don't have that that flaw in them, in which phones tend to disassemble themselves in an unscheduled manner. Because it's just the Special Military Operation Cranium. Gee, this is hard. Because of that, we just calculate based on the amount of trinitrotoluene we assume is actually sitting within the end of the drone. That makes it a bit easier, and from that you get 300 Shahed drones. And just for funsies, I was actually making a calculation on if the Ukrainians had an equivalent yield of trinitrotoluene, and we found out that each of those Ukrainian prisoners, had they been on board the plane when it unscheduled disassembled itself, they would have had approximately 200 kilos of trinitrotoluene equivalent in their bodies, which gives you an idea why the Russians are having such a hard time defeating the Ukrainians, because they are just that tough. There goes your propaganda. You can obviously now craft a theory as to what the plane was actually carrying. It seems very likely that it was either Shahed drones or S-300 missiles, but I'll leave that to other people to decide. I think from what I've seen, it's very likely that either one of those cargoes could have created that size of a plume. And we're going to move over now to who actually did it, who actually organized the unscheduled disassembly of this aircraft. That's a much tougher question because, well, there are a few issues with all of the theories that have been thrown out so far, and they're probably going to get thrown out because I don't think any of the theories work particularly well. What we can do is we can say that Ukraine originally claimed to have initiated the disassembly, but then they later retracted that, or at least didn't say any more about it. Russia have actually claimed that Ukraine did it. Somehow that makes me feel instantly that they didn't do it. I know that's bad research, but so far it's worked pretty well with Russian statements. Don't ask me why. What we can, however, do is we can have a little bit of a look at the video footage that we were examining previously, and as well as the pixel size, we can also get ourselves an idea of what actually happened, because if you have a look over here, and I've zoomed in for you, you actually see this little puff of smoke just floating over the horizon, merrily on its way as the plane is, doing its thing. Zoomed in, it looks like this. So, what does that plume represent? On the right-hand side, over here, I've actually got some images that have been taken from the Gulf War. And these images are essentially a series of stills of a Patriot tube doing its job. We'll call it that. And of course, when a Patriot does its job, then it creates a plume. So we can compare these plumes. Let's have a look at them. This plume, nothing like it. This plume, nothing like it. Remember, this is all kind of in this, it's all in a series, so you wouldn't expect it all to be the same. But this one looks pretty good. This one looks pretty good, but not perfect. And these four, I'm not particularly happy with those. So yeah, if you squint your brain a bit, maybe you could think that these guys match this, these guys here match this guy over here, but I'm not 100% convinced of that. If you've seen my previous video, you'll know that I actually had a look at the pattern of debris that hit the skin of the planes, and I also compared the MH17A. This is not the MH17A. This is the wreckage that hit the ground from the current incident. This is the IL-22 that actually. This is the IL-22 that actually made it home. What you can see about this is that you can see some nice round puncture marks from the IL-76 that disassembled. It's pretty rough and ready what happened there. You can see that. So there is a slight amount of evidence to say it was a Patriot Block 2, but not really good. So did Ukraine do it? Possibly not. Did Russia do it? Not entirely convinced Russia did it either. The blast just doesn't really match anything, does it? I mean, it could. This is very scattered debris, so the crucial piece of debris might not actually be in the picture here. And that's just part of the course. But I think there are actually other theories that fit the data better. I suppose you're curious as to what those theories might be. Welcome to acronym hell. I'm sorry about this, but there are a whole heap of things that I need to get out and get the equations from, and you need to know that they exist so that you know that this presentation has some kind of credibility. So the basic ones are, I think they call it GIERAS, GIERAS, and also FAA. I think most people are familiar with these sorts of things. There are also manuals for Cessna and Learjet. They get more important later on because I needed to find out stuff like how much reserve fuel was carried in planes and stuff like that, what the general idea in industry was, what they would do, because you don't just fly a plane on empty. So I managed to do all of that, and I've gotten all the equations out of them, and I'll show you them later on. But yeah, the calculations come from the 2013 report and the 1988 FAA final report. And the reason why we're worrying about this is because fuel vapor actually is a problem. If anybody is alive enough to remember the 80s, then they'll know that there are several planes that actually did fall out of the sky, and they thought that it was actually some foreign agents or some foul play that caused these planes to have catastrophic accidents, but it wasn't. In the end, it turned out to be fuel vapor, and because of that, the dangerous quantities of fuel vapor have been calculated. And what they found out is roughly, if the ratio of fuel to air goes below 0.03%, so that means if you've got 0.03% fuel and the rest is air, then you've got something very dangerous happening. And the dangerous thing that they refer to in this point is something called the flash point. Just a few technical issues. The lower the flash point, the bigger the problem. So the other thing you need to know, and I did allude to this a little bit when I was talking about the Cessna manuals and whatnot, planes don't necessarily fill up with fuel. That's unnecessary weight. So they fill up with the amount of fuel that they think is necessary for them to get from point A to point B. And they don't want to fly completely out of fuel, so they give themselves a little bit of a reserve. And I found out from a lot of these manuals, and I didn't get it from major airlines, and nor did I get it from anything Russian. So I don't know what the Russian standards are, but it seems a reasonably good estimation based on what I've read that most people have a 5% reserve sitting in their tanks. And I know that this is a fairly common standard because there was a fairly tragic accident that happened just off the coast of Africa, in which tourists who were holidaying on the beach managed to watch a plane ditch in the ocean. And the reason that happened was the plane was hijacked. And the people, they didn't want anything bad. They just wanted to get out of their country. It was pretty sad when you actually saw what was going on. They just wanted to get out of the country, and they said, we want to fly to this destination. I don't remember what the destination was. And the pilot said, we don't have enough fuel for it. They went back into the passenger area, and they came back with the documentation for the plane, and they said, look, this plane has enough fuel to do this. And the pilots, try as they might, could not explain to these people that they didn't put that much fuel into the plane in the first place, and it resulted in a very tragic accident. A lot of the people ended up perishing in that particular incident. Fortunately, because it was close to a resort, people were able to swim out to the plane and actually rescue a few people. So it wasn't all bad, but certainly you don't want that to happen. Anyway, so we know that there is a chance that there is a 5% reserve in the tank. Is this 5% reserve important? Well, according to my calculations, it certainly is. I got all the numbers off the aviation websites, so you don't have to. Yeah, you're welcome. But if you want to zoom in on this slide, and if you want, just ask me, I will happily release the formulas for the spreadsheet, or I might even do it in R to give you some R code or Python code or something. And you can do the calculations yourself, or you can possibly do the calculations a bit better because you might have a bit better knowledge of what's going on here. I'm perfectly happy for this to be refined to actually come to the truth, not just to some crank theory because I didn't quite put the numbers right. But I think that if you use something called a Fermi estimate, basically you do your best guess as to each parameter. You actually come up with a pretty good answer, just in case you're wondering. So I'm not particularly worried, but at the same time, there's no harm in doing it accurately. So what we've got is the spreadsheet here, and I've got my handy dandy drawing tool, and we can just circle here. This is a 50% fuel idea, and in cheerful letters it says safe. And if you've got 5% fuel, sadly, we're in danger now. So basically what's happening here is that the fuel has actually gotten to the flash point. So if there's any faults in the wiring, we're in trouble. That's basically what we're talking about here. So the Aleutian 76 is in the danger zone. And what I found out is a few other little pieces of information. The flash point actually decreases as the temperature decreases. So that means that I'm going in freedom units. I think it's about about negative 6 degrees, if I remember correctly. And I think that's, what is that? It'll be close to zero, maybe 10 Fahrenheit, something like that. At about that kind of temperature, it gets quite dangerous. And then I found out something rather more alarming in the fact that the Russian planes actually have a different fuel mix. It's not because they're totally unsafe, it's because they have to. They have to put a bit of antifreeze into their fuel, basically. And apparently if you rejig the kerosene mix, then you can get yourself fuel that will not ice up as much. But unfortunately, the consequence of that is that the flash point is once again lowered. So you have a lowering of about 10 degrees centigrade, which, if I remember correctly, have I written it? Yeah, it increases the likelihood of an explosion by 30%. So you've got an especially cold day. You've got a fuel mix, which is an accident waiting to happen. You've possibly got a plane that is an accident waiting to happen. And so we've got Russia and we've got Ukraine with different stories about what happened, but I am going to propose to you that the simple conclusion to all of this is the plane shot itself down. Think it was an air accident. Happy to release all of this stuff. There's a few little things that we can go through here, and then we can go on to what will happen next. So going through all of the information, I found this little gem. Not only was this thing an accident waiting to happen, but as far as I can tell, it's happened before. The reason why this is interesting is because this plane, even though it's a lot more intact, the same kind of pattern happened in which you find that the tail section's left relatively whole and the rest of the plane is detached. And one of the things that was mentioned when the Ilyushin 76 was falling was they said they saw what looked like cargo coming out of it. And I would propose that it was actually just a plane coming apart due to the fact it was weakened and there were aerodynamic stresses involved. I don't think it's particularly that far outside the realm of possibility for that kind of thing to happen. But in October, on October 19th, 2023, an Ilyushin 76 burst into flames on takeoff in Tajikistan, and Tajikistan is pretty cold. It did manage to land, everyone got out, and it was well away from the special military operation, so there's nothing suspicious. But I'm going to say, I'm not definitively stating this, but I'm going to say that perhaps that also is related to fuel detonating in the fuel tanks. I don't know what it was doing, where it was going, all that kind of stuff. Just don't know. But it's an interesting theory, isn't it? So putting this all together, we have two rapid unscheduled disassemblies of the aircraft. One happens, at its cruising altitude, whatever is going on there, and then the second one is much more spectacular on the ground. So what we think happened, and I'll just go straight through this, and I've got my extremely sophisticated computer graphic just here. You can see that, brilliant. So at 7 a.m., the plane enters the zone of contention and deactivates its transponder. At 10 a.m., the fuel consumption in the tanks drops to below 5%. At 10:05, the remaining fuel gets hot, causing a rapid unscheduled disassembly of part of the plane. Catastrophic damage, the plane's uncontrollable, begins to descend, and in a little while, aerodynamic stresses being what they are, just starts to tear the thing apart. Finally, it hits the ground, and then 10 tons of trinitrotoluene equivalent conflagration occurs, and a plume erupts, and it's probably exceeding a cubic kilometer in size. So that's what I think happened, and I think that we've got some pretty good evidence to say that is actually what happened. The implications are thus, it's all well and good knowing what happened, but can we actually make some inferences that move further into the strategic direction of what's going on in Ukraine at the moment? And I think we can. And the size of the unscheduled disassembly gives an indication as to the cargo. And so, just unpicking these sorts of things can actually lead to some interesting conclusions, don't you think? And so, is there any other data that's out there that can actually be used to start looking seriously at the logistics of what's going on here? And of course, I'm interested in this method of thought that I want it to benefit Ukraine. And I think that we can actually put our thinking caps on and start collecting data and start working on ways of unpicking the network of things that are traveling all around the place. So it's an interesting thought, and I think we can do it. I mentioned earlier that this was originally just a one presentation talk, but it spiraled a little bit out of control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another presentation, basically called Making Your Data Work Harder and Smarter. From planes to pins on a map. Planes, trains, and natural disasters. What's all this going to mean? I don't know. You'll just have to watch. If I release the video, you never know. It might be top secret. I suppose all that's left to do now is to be incredibly thankful for all the people who've potentially watched this video. And I think that I'll end it in the same way as a particular professor who I've been watching recently has been putting it. He says, thank you for watching and thank you for caring about Ukraine. And I certainly hope that's you. All right, I think I'm done now. Dr. Phil out.